All right, we're going to go ahead and get started today. So we are moving on. We are doing a class called Your Role in the Body, where we're looking at different ways that people can be practically involved in serving the body, being part of the body. I need to turn my YouTube down. We've discussed 9 of 10 gifts so far, and so today we are approaching the last one, which is giving, the passion of charity. And then we'll do a week, this week and next week on giving, and then after that will be kind of let's kind of summarize the class and connect everything together through June, and then after that, it is not me teaching. So I think there's some ideas in the works for July and forward. All right, so as we've discussed, most of these class periods to start out with, this class will provide a practical guide to applying your God-given gifts to help others and to effectively search in the church body. So essentially the point of this was to try to provide some pathways to being able to serve in the body in different ways. Now there's literally service is one of the ways. So if you don't know what you're doing, or you're not sure if you're doing the thing that kind of fulfills you the most, what are some ways that you can be more involved and to do that? So really the whole point of this is practical application and to be active, because we are called to be active as members of the body. When we're talking about gifts, we're talking about the combination of talent and passion. As we've gone throughout the class, I think a better definition is skill and focus, because talent to me is kind of something that you either have or you don't have, like it's just a God-given ability. Whereas skill is something that you can maybe overlaps with talent, but is something you're able to develop over time. And so you think about some, like athletes and things like that. There are some of them who are just insanely genetically talented, but they have developed their skill set over several years. Same can be said of any profession that you're in. You develop that skill set over time. And then really focus is a major component of this, I think, because it's when you're in church, when you're going through life or you're in church, what are the things that you're focused on? So as mine is teaching, so I'm more focused on like, what can I learn today? And then are the things I can learn and I can apply to my life or tell others that to help them apply that to their lives. Just a glitch, it's all right. So in the same way, but not everybody has that same focus, right? So some people are looking around and saying, who needs encouragement? Or, how can I help someone? How can I give to someone? So your focus, I think, determines quite a bit about what your gift is. Once again, they need to be used and loved. We're going to see some examples today of those who maybe weren't sincere in their gift or did not use it in love or did not use it in care. And so all these gifts need to be used in love, and they need to be used in unity of the body. And then when we're looking at the body, we're looking at Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12. We had a discussion on that in our first class, and we came away with these takeaways. All of us have gifts, and all of us are expected to use them. So again, kind of the foundational point of this class, how do you get more involved and be more active if you are not? Be humble in your gift, but on the flip side, don't be afraid to use your gift, or don't think that just because maybe someone is quote unquote better at it than you are, that means that you should not be active in your gift. And I'll make a plug. If you aren't sure where to start, findmyspiritualgift.com as a test, and it kind of ranks has different questions, and based on your answers to those questions, ranks kind of what is probably your gift compared to what is probably not. All right, so today we're talking about giving. So giver, which is the passion of charity. I'm going to start in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 through 8, and we're going to read all the way through verse 8, which is where our jumping off point is today. So it says, I urge you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. For through the grace given to me, I say to every man among you, not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. For just as we have many members in one body, and all members do not have the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually members of one of another. And since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let each exercise them accordingly. if prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith, if service, in his serving, or he who teaches, in his teaching, or he who exhorts, in his exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness. So, he who gives, and apparently the passage that I was using from the New American Standard online versus the New American Standard that I have right here uses even a different word, generosity versus liberality. Similar concept, we're going to discuss both here in just a second. So again, this is based on a book called Spiritual Giftedness by Doug Hamilton, where he did testing results and kind of categorized, how often someone has this gift, kind of in a general population. Fred is always concerned with making sure these numbers add up to 100, and they do, and we'll see that soon. So roughly only 2% of people have this gift, which is interesting. So it's the smallest percentage of all of them. Now, I think that there might be a correlation between the fact that this is the smallest number, and also one of the main points of being a giver is that people don't know that you're giving. So again, there might be something to that people who are truly givers will not consider themselves that way or will not admit that they are that way. So the Greek word that's used in this passage means to share. So give, share. Give means to grant or bestow, to provide to someone else. Share means to divide and distribute or apportion. And then apportion, to divide and share out according to a plan. So we have a lot of dividing out, sharing. So taking a portion of what you have and giving it to someone else. I do kind of like the apportion being share according to a plan. I think it's important to have a plan. Then again, that's kind of part of my personality, right, is to be more of a planner. I think we'll see that that's where part of the gift of giving is doing so without hesitation, but then that's part of where the experience and the maturity comes in. When do you do things according to a plan? When do you act quickly and without hesitation to give to someone? And then the second word describing that Paul gives. So let's see, when we had said when giving mercy to do so with cheerfulness, and then last week, or see, so then there's usually a word that describes it. So it's essentially a reminder or a thing to additionally describe what they are to do. So if you are a giver, you should remember to do so with generosity or liberality, depending on the translation that you have. So leads with diligence. Sorry, that was what I was trying to remember. So if you're leading, you should do so with diligence. So if you're giving, you should do so generously. So generous means liberal in giving, open-handed, warm-hearted readiness to give. Liberal means given freely and unstintingly, largeness in the thing or amount given. Now, I would not necessarily agree with that last part of the definition, that is part of the definition, right, is maybe it's a large amount, but when we're talking about the gift of giving, the amount is not part of it. It's more, again, being free and open-handed with your giving and not hesitating, not attaching strings to your gift. So let's dive into this a little bit further.
I would say if you have nothing, largeness is kind of dependent on that. You know what I mean?
Well, true. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So great point. So it could depend largeness to percentage-wise, right? Maybe not necessarily amount-wise. So yes, good point. Proportionally, a large amount. Everyone can or should. So disclaimer I always like to make with the first point here. Everyone can or should give to others, but not everyone has this gift. So this class will focus on those with the gift of giving, meaning they are more focused on and more willing to share their resources with others who are in need. Yeah, that covers that. So this is straight out of the book. It is a deep desire of needing to pass one's blessings to those who are in need. I put the underline in there. It is not in the book. To me, this is something, this is the same in every gift. So we talked about for evangelists. So they have the need to tell others about the death, burial, and resurrection. If you are a servant, you need to, or you feel strongly that you have to, you're compelled to help others with tasks, right? So whatever your gift is, that's probably part of it, right? It's your focus, and then what you feel so compelled that you have to do. So when we're talking about giving, it's needing or strongly desiring to pass one's blessings on to others who are in need. Giving is a redistribution of the blessings received from God, who is the source of all blessings and resources. So we see in James chapter 1, verse 17, that every gift comes from above. And this is no different. But it's the giver who is much more in tune with this concept that all the resources are from God, and therefore aren't as likely to hold on to them quite as tightly as other people hold on to what they have. This is something that we talk about all the time when we're doing communion and we talk about the offering, right? I've said it several times too, right? Everything we have comes from God, and so why are we holding on to it? We need to then pass that on, give back to God by giving to others, giving to the church, which helps to give to others, those types of things. So, do we truly mean that? Do we need that reminder frequently that, hey, everything comes from God, so like don't be holding on to it too tightly? I think that someone who is a giver would not necessarily need that reminder. So they're more in tune with that concept and are more willing to do so than others are. Another quote out of the book: "The person with a true passion in this gift does not ask, how much can I give to the Lord, but rather, how much do I need to live on?" So again, it's the mindset of the person who is gifted in giving, which is the opposite probably of most of our reactions. So in other words, the usual reaction would be, okay, so how much do I have to give so that now the rest of what I have can be freed up to spend on the expenses I have coming up, my wants, my needs, my desires, those types of things, right? So, it is a good thing to then pull off the top of what you're going to give, and we say, okay, now that I've got that taken care of, I can focus the rest on myself. The giver would look at it the opposite way. So they're saying, what's the minimum I need to actually live on to free up everything else that I need to give to other people? Financial wealth does not determine if someone has the gift of giving. Once again, so it's the attitude, the focus, and the mindset of the giver who sets them apart. So I think it's easy to fall into the trap that, or the thought, maybe I should say, that those with big incomes are gifted that way in order to give, making a bigger impact with their, say, 10% that they're giving, as opposed to someone who doesn't have a lot with their 10%. And maybe there's some truth that some people have been gifted by God with large incomes in order to give and make big impacts in that way. But again, that's not what we're discussing today. So in the passages that we're going to read in just a minute, we'll see that people give out of whatever means they have, whether it's a little bit or a lot. So the greatest givers that you'll ever meet, you won't realize it because they don't broadcast it, and you'll at least expect it. I think part of that is probably because they aren't retaining it, right? So they're not buying the new car, they're not buying the in-fashion clothes, they're just kind of operating more frugally, and so that they have more money then to give to other people. So again, just as the case with each gift that we discussed, it's more about the focus of that person that determines the true passion of this gift, not exactly what you have from a worldly standpoint. Finally, givers do not have strings attached to their gifts or expectations of reciprocity. They prefer to give anonymously, and their gifts are sincere. So if you're looking at a translation comparison of Romans chapter 12, verse 8, most of them say generous, several of them say with liberality. There are a couple that say with simplicity or with sincerity. So if something is given in sincerity, that means, you're being, so to compare it, when we talked about servants, and when I asked Addie what was one of the things that you would tell others, she said, if I'm offering to help, that means I'm truly offering to help. Like, I'm being sincere in my offer. It's not just something to say to make you feel good or to make me feel good. So if you have something, tell me so that I can help you out. And so then it would be the same for givers, right? So it'd be, I truly just want to give something to you. I'm not doing this so that I can get something in return. I'm not doing this and then expect to be repaid later in a different way. I'm not doing this to now you owe me. Now I have a power position over you. Dwayne?
I think with all of these traits, whatever your gift is, you willingly do it and you don't even think about it. It's just your nature, your demeanor, your whatnot. And I think that you're bringing up a good point with this when it comes to the gift piece of it, because they just do it without even thinking about it. It's just who they are. It just happens. And
yeah.
I think I don't know, from the stuff that I've listened to, this makes the most sense of that, like coming to clarity, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So I do know some people who, to keep things anonymous, right? So who would say that they are really good at giving to others, or who would talk about that they are generous, and then they have 10 years worth of everything that they've given to that person tracked and recorded and remember, even though they're not necessarily going to ask for it, but they have. I will neither confirm nor deny. No. So is that truly giving if you're tracking every expenditure that you've made towards every giving thing that you've done for someone? Probably not. So once again, they do it. Sorry, Kevin.
Would that fall in category as your right hand not knowing what your left hand is doing?
Oh yeah, that's definitely wrapped up into it. Preferring to give anonymously, so not doing it to show off or
It's personal guidelines for utilizing your gift and giving is don't even be aware yourself of how much you're giving, except for IRS purposes should they come back and hit you.
Yeah.
On behalf of the government.
Yes, we will talk about that in just a minute. So Kathy has a comment.
You're welcome.
I think it also, when you look at that, you have to look at, well, does God count the things that he's given to us? And are we accepting of that, or do we recognize that? So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So just that exact point, that understanding that everything comes from God and he gives freely, and so then we do the same thing. There's another example that's a pretty good analogy that we're going to see in just a minute. So, all right, so let's look at some passages that describe giving. These first three are the same word that's used in Romans chapter 12, verse 8. We can still take something from it, but the point of these first three is more to show like how it can be translated. How, based on the context, it can mean give or share is essentially the summary of that. So Luke chapter 3, verse 11, and he would answer and say to them, the one who has 2 tunics is to share with the one who has none, and the one who has food is to do likewise. So this passage uses the same word, as I just said, in Romans chapter 12, verse 8. I use the New American Standard, so the New American Standard translates it to share here instead of give. So the context of this is John the Baptist talking to a crowd, and they ask him how they are supposed to behave if they are truly repentant. And part of his reply is to share with those who are less fortunate. So don't be focused on yourself, in other words, be other-focused and give to others if you have plenty for yourself. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, the one who steals must no longer steal, but rather he must labor, producing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has need. Again, same word as Romans chapter 12, verse 8, but translated share instead of give here. The context of Ephesians 4 starts with to walk in the manner worthy of your calling. And so then it's kind of a list of what does that look like in the rest of Ephesians chapter 4. And then closer down, I don't remember exactly what verse it is, closer to around verse 20, it talks about how Paul's talking about the new person versus the old person. So you put off the old self, you put on the new self when you're a Christian. So the old self would have the attitude of taking, right? So that's what stealing is. It's taking, and it's taking a shortcut to help yourself by hurting someone else. And the new person in Christ no longer takes, they give. So they gain resources honestly, and they use those resources, again, not for themselves, but to help others. So it's a juxtaposition of the old self and the new self. The old self takes, and the new self gives. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. But we proved to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. In the same way, we had a fond affection for you and were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. So again, same word used in Romans chapter 12, verse 8, translated to share, at least in the New American Standard. Another word that several translations use in this specific passage is to impart. So impart means to give, to share, or bestow. It also means to transfer something to someone. So here, Paul is stressing to the Thessalonians that his motive in his ministry with them has always been pure because he has this deep affection for them and this care for them. In other words, he loves them, right? So as a result, he shared or he imparted or he transferred the gospel to them and with them, but in the process, he also gave part of his life to them as well. I think that we can take the attitude from that as something that we can learn about giving. So the analogy that he uses is a nursing mother tenderly caring for her children. So a mother tenderly cares for her children by only giving and never receiving. So Lily has this, she's fallen into this tendency recently where she says, hey, Dad, why do we have, and just the first thing she sees. So why do we have trees? Why do we have sidewalks? Why do we have traffic lights? All very important things, right? So yesterday we're sitting on the couch and she goes, hey, Dad, why do we need sleep? I was like, all right, well, it's to help the body recover and that's how you grow, so you need to sleep more. So, and then that was a joke. And then the next question she asked was, Dad, why do we need grown-ups? I was like, exactly. To make your life difficult. No, I didn't say that. And I said, well, babies can't do anything for themselves. Like, they can't feed themselves, they can't protect themselves, they can't do anything for themselves, so grown-ups have to do everything for them. And she said, oh, and they sleep, and then they wake up and cry, and I said, yeah, you're right, and the grown-ups have to get up with them. And it's very tiring to do that over and over again, right? So all you're doing as a parent, now, I'm sure there's situations out there where wouldn't be this case, but generally speaking, parents, if you have an unconditional love for your child, you will only give to the child. You would never take from them. You would never expect to give and then not receive back, and then want to receive something back from them. You're not looking to have a power play over them. Now you're wanting them to obey you, right? So that's a different kind of perspective. But the point being, you're only giving to them, and you're only giving sincerely. You're not taking. So Paul uses that analogy to describe how he was trying to care for the Thessalonians. So, let's see. So once again, the gifts are pure, they're without strings attached, without ulterior motives. And so Paul was giving the gospel to the Thessalonians and also part of his life to them because he loved them and he cared for them and he had affection for them. Luke chapter 21, verses 1 through 4. Now he looked up and saw the wealthy putting their gifts into the temple treasury. And he saw a poor widow putting in 2 lepta coins. And he said, truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than all of them, for they all contributed to the offering from their surplus, but she from her poverty put in all that she had to live on. So again, we have a juxtaposition here, right? So we have the wealthy, and then we have this really poor widow. So it's easy to be impressed by the great sums of money that the wealthy were giving. But it's likely that didn't make a dent in their wealth because Jesus says, well, they're just sharing out of their surplus. She's sharing out of her poverty. So it was just a show, right? So then Jesus sees that poor widow putting in 2 coins, and he says, that's the lesson here. And he says, notice in here, he says that this poor widow put in more than all of them. So not more than some of them, not more than most of them. She put in more than all of them. I read that a mite, or a lepton, depending on what your translation uses, was essentially 1% of a day's wages. So we're talking about nickels that she's throwing in here, right? So it was nothing. No one would have faulted her for putting in 1 coin instead of 2 because she already doesn't have anything. She has breadcrumbs basically. But instead she gave all she had. So it was a real sacrifice in her giving and a real trust in God and really putting her faith in God compared to those who would tell you how much faith that they have in God and how much trust they have in God. So the true giver isn't determined by how much you can give, but by how much it costs you to give. 2 Corinthians verses 8, verses 1 through 5. Now, brothers and sisters, we make known to you the grace of God, which has been given to the churches in Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testify that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave voluntarily, begging us with much urging for the favor of participation in the support of the saints. And this, not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. So Paul is seeking to take up a collection for people in Jerusalem who are being persecuted. They're going through a really difficult time. So the shining example that he has to hold up to the Corinthians in saying, hey, you should also give to this cause, is the Macedonians. Now, apparently, they had been through a great deal of affliction themselves, and they were also impoverished themselves, but they didn't let that stop them. So they were determined to give and to help out their brethren the only way they could, and they did so joyfully and voluntarily. So earlier I talked about how true givers need to give to other people, right? So if you're using your gift, you feel compelled or you feel this need to be active in your gift, right? So here it says that they begged Paul to be able to participate in giving to others. So how often would you see that? Someone who is begging to be able to give to someone. Like, I don't know, maybe the people I hang around, I don't know. I would not say that anyone would have necessarily that attitude of being like chomping at the bit to give and to help someone in some situation. Even if someone's maybe trying to hold them back, it's like, you don't have a lot to give, maybe you shouldn't. They're like, no, I'm going to do this. So Paul points out, again, if we're looking at this passage, first, that they gave themselves to God. And so just another example of how it's through God that we're able to then give to others. All right, Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. I'm sure you all knew this one was coming. But a man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property and kept back some of the proceeds for himself with his wife's full knowledge. And bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back some of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not under your control? Why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. And as he heard these words, Ananias collapsed and died, and great fear came over all who heard about it. The young men got up and covered him, and after carrying him out, they buried him. Now an interval of about 3 hours elapsed, and his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter responded to her, tell me whether you sold this land for this price? And she said, yes, for that price. Then Peter said to her, why is it that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out as well. And immediately she collapsed at his feet and died. And the young men came in and found her dead. And they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And a great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard about these things. So, clearly an example of what is not a true giver, right? The sin for Ananias and Sapphira was not greed. The sin was pride. They wanted the recognition and the public display for giving a great amount, but in reality, they didn't give as much as they were acting like they gave. So their gift was not given in sincerity. So we talked about, giving with liberality, giving with generosity, giving with sincerity. So this is an example of what it looks like to not give in sincerity, to not give in love. They gave in deceit. So again, no one would have faulted them if they'd been upfront about this. They said, hey, we have this property, we sold it, we have some things we got to take care of, we kept back this portion, the rest, do with it what you will. No one would have had an issue with that. The issue, again, was that their motive was to appear to be more generous than they actually were. So they were seeking approval from men and lying to God, which clearly is not what the gift of giving is about. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. This is what Kevin alluded to earlier. Take care not to practice your righteousness in the sight of people, to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do, in the synagogues and on the street, so that they will be praised by people. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your charitable giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what's done in secret will reward you. So something I thought was interesting that I read about the temple treasury that may not exactly tie in with this passage because it's talking about how sounding the trumpets before them as they're going, but when it talks about trumpets, kind of was the jumping off point. So apparently in the temple treasury, in the court of women, there were 13 chests, and they were called trumpets because the top of it was narrow and the bottom of it was really wide. And so when you dropped coins in it, it made a really loud clanging noise as it went down into the trumpet, into that chest. And they had different chests for different offerings, and then some of the chests were, basically an additional amount that you can just give if you want to. So if you had so now if you picture wealthy people coming in with a whole bunch of coins and just the spectacle that would create if you're dumping a whole bunch of coins into this trumpet and how loud it is, compared to then someone who doesn't have a lot walking over and just very quietly, slipping their coins in comparatively. I think it's a pretty good illustration of the difference between doing something for show, doing something that gets you noticed by other people, versus doing something in secrecy. So here Jesus is correcting the attitude that we're to have when we go through the world, and especially as it relates to giving. So once again, when we give, we don't do it for recognition. We don't do it for praise. It gets back to, again, looking at the word that's used in Romans 12, verse 8, whether it means generous, liberal, sincere. So a sincere person does not do things for show. Clearly, now, he's also being hyperbolic in the comment that Kevin made, like being so secretive that one part of your body doesn't even know what the other part of your body is doing. But it's to prove the point, which Kevin is about to expand upon.
No, I was
okay.
going to draw back at Acts 5. The interesting thing about Ananias and Sapphira, the context is a fuller expression of Acts 2. So in the whole context, you have people from all over the Mediterranean world that become Christians. They're there to be grounded. They want to stay and be grounded in the teaching of Jesus. It's before persecution hit. How are we going to take care of all these people and help them get their needs met? How are we going to help them as they stay here? And they obviously don't have any place to stay for a long period. They don't have anything to eat. They don't have any work. And so we need to help them out. And so the church stepped up voluntarily and began, I've got some extra properties, and they sold it and started giving. Well, Barnabas rises to, again, he rises to the occasion of, I've got some, and apparently it was prominent enough that it encouraged everyone else. So he must, I think he would fall in the category of gift of giving and giving generously. And he sold a lot of properties. He had a lot of properties. He gave out of his abundance upon, and the word metadidomi is, you give upon and upon and upon. It's like you're extravagant in your giving. What Paul said, God loves a hilarious giver. And so he's getting a kick out of helping other people. And Ananias and Sapphira, notice, I think, his prominence. And so, and there's a bit possibly of jealous. I'm reading now into the text, but they're wanting that same notoriety. And so they cover over, and they're giving abundantly, but they're pretending to give it all. And so the contrast is so sharp in that. And God's response to that is also extremely sharp. But the attitude of giving is underlying on both parts. And so we see the generosity of Barnabas saying, here's an opportunity to give and help. And he can't help it. He has to. It's his driving gift. And if he's giving encouragement, he's giving money, he's giving property, he just gives and gives and gives, and he's not even thinking about it. And of course he's aware. I don't know he's keeping track to get equality, but everybody knows what they're given. Yeah. God knows what he gives. He doesn't keep track and say, now you owe me.
Yes. That is a great introduction to our next passage that we're going to read. No, it really is. No, it's a good context that I wasn't going to go all the way into the full context of all of that. But yes, I also saw in a commentary they alluded to the fact that this came right on the heels of Barnabas's gift, and so like, hey, he got all this praise, like, let's do the same thing. Here you go. And they went, nope, not the same thing. And then whether they happened to die of natural causes or not, however the Lord works, he works, right? So the other direction I want to go with this just real quick is that I think we've all seen celebrities, public figures, organizations maybe, that will announce that they made a big donation, right? So they want everyone to know that they're being generous because they want that to be the public perception of them. I think now I pay really close attention to the sports world. And so oftentimes after like a natural disaster, so say if there was a tornado here in Manhattan, maybe the Kansas City Royals or the Chiefs, because they need a little better PR nowadays, would say, we're going to give $1 million to help in the tornado relief. And so they would put out a press release saying, hey, we're doing this. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, right? So there's nothing wrong with putting out a press release to say like, hey, we gave this much, here's what's going on. But again, it's the difference in what a true giver does versus someone who's giving and then also wanting the recognition or the credit or the show for that. So, and you can argue on a practical level that those huge gifts with the nice press release and everything make a huge dent in whatever the cause is compared to someone who's giving secretly and doesn't have that much. But the more I read the Bible, the more I think that really all it's telling us to do is to have the right attitude and to have the right mindset in how you're walking through the world and how you're interacting with others. And so the point that Jesus is making is not, or I guess the point that this passage is making is not necessarily that, is just to have the right attitude and to fix your attitude as you're going through life. Mike has a comment.
Just looking through this list, most of this is referring to something monetary. Mm-hmm. I think we oftentimes can become trapped with the world. A lot of times we may throw money at something.
Yeah, that's a good point.
To protect ourselves from giving of self. And when I say giving of self, we got other gifts other than money.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if we don't use those gifts in such a way that we are providing that service to others, we don't have the proper attitude, the proper mindset, as you referred to just a little bit ago. And it's a trap a lot of people fall into. It's easier to throw money at something than to actually do something.
Oh, yeah. Agreed. And it goes along with what Paul said. Fred has a comment. Paul said that, he gave the gospel to them and he gave part of his life to them. So in the same way, so if you're gifted, so I keep using teaching just because that's mine. I don't want to step on anyone else's toes. But if you're a teacher, then you give by using your gift to help others and to help the body as a whole, right?
I was just going to follow up on this idea of giving something other than monetary, and I was kind of saving it to the end so I didn't spoil your train, but Mike jumped the gun on me. But at any rate, I've known many Christians who were financially very limited, who have given so much of their time to helping others that the difference was huge, and yet I guess you could say they never counted the cost. And I think that that's something that oftentimes we overlook in terms of what we can give too. And you say, well, I just don't have it. I just don't have it in my bank account. There's especially, and gosh, I wish I could remember her name. If Bonnie were here, she would. A woman years ago in San Antonio who actually almost became the coordinator of going out and helping people because she couldn't get to all the people she knew needed help on her own. And it worked because I found myself out there doing stuff too. But at any rate, I think that I want to be sure that everyone here recognizes when you say, well, gosh, I just don't have the pennies in my pocket to make a difference, that the difference sometimes is much greater when it's your time and effort.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, so that, and whenever I do community, that's why I was trying to make a point that's like, let's give back through our, not just our resources, but our time, our energy, our talents, the things that we have, right?
I think an interesting point you were drawing a little bit ago, Tyler, is you do things and people see it, and it's okay to say or okay to let people know. It's the motive of why. Let your light shine in such a way to give glory to God. And if your motive is, like Barnabas, he had to let somebody know instead of coming in and saying, well, here's some property that someone here sold, and they want you to have this money, and the apostles then spread it to those who had need. Rather, he let people know, because that would be an encouragement for them to give. You give in such a way that others see it, and they give glory to God. Or you give in such a way they see it, and they give glory to you. What's your motive in letting people know? Because even when Jesus said, now when you pray, step into your closet. Don't let others see you pray. Did he ever pray publicly? Of course he did. He prayed and people saw him and they heard him. So it's not a commandment, don't ever pray publicly. It's
Yes.
why are you doing this?
Yes, exactly.
And it's a gift that drives. Now, you also, something about maturity. If I'm immature, and back to what Mike was saying about the motives, and, we got to check our attitude and all, and that's exactly right. But I grow in that. Maybe at one time, there was a comic strip. You guys remember Nancy, the comic strip?
No.
Yeah, some of you are old enough to remember, like Mike and Fred, definitely. But she was at church and she was deciding a nickel or a quarter, and the collection plate was coming around, and the guy speaking said, "Remember, God loves a cheerful giver." And then she says, "Well, I can give a nickel more cheerfully than I can a quarter." And she's putting that in. And so check that motive as well,
Yes. David.
I just wanted to add a more practical story. A real life story. So in 2022, I was on Fort Bliss getting ready to deploy, and that Christmas Eve, my sister's house burned down, and they lost everything except the firefighters saved the Christmas presents. But I had shared their GoFundMe on my Facebook page, and there was a guy in my unit who came to me the next day, and he just said, "Hey, I saw that, and I gave some money." He wasn't looking for that recognition. He was just letting me know, "Hey, I saw this, and I care." It's not about, you don't always have to be completely quiet about it. It's just, yeah, like they're saying, it's the motive.
Yes, exactly.
So I think this comes back to what you were talking about. As we all mature as Christians, we all give to a certain extent, right? As you grow and everything else. But the thing about this is 2% people do this willingly, have that gift that they just do it and they don't care about the recognition piece of it and everything else of that nature. And I think, like with so many of these, we want to be that because we're
Yes.
Christians. We want to be that glad giver. We want to, give them the shirt off our back to help them with that and everything else of that nature. But it's those underlying remnant people that do it without ever even thinking twice about it, and they could care less about what they have with that and stuff. And so I think it's important to remember that there's tons of examples in the Bible of giving, but that doesn't necessarily mean those people were givers.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so we won't get to the last passage, but if you want a little preview, Kevin was right on it with, it's one of my favorite passages in the Bible. The last, since we only have about a minute left, this week, so my group that I work with, that I supervise, once a month we go out to eat at wherever we choose, just as a way to, team bonding, team building type of thing. So this week we're on our way to Chick-fil-A because I got to choose. And as we're trying to pull in, of course if you've been in the Chick-fil-A, drive in and out, people don't know which one's the in and which one's the out, and it gets all confusing, and you get frustrated if you've been there a couple times. So we're waiting to turn. Someone turns in. We're trying to turn. In the meantime, another car's coming. That car stops. And so the person who's driving goes, "What are they doing? Like, why are they stopping right there? Like, that's a terrible place to stop." I look over. There's someone who's standing on the corner with a sign that says, "Please help me, blah, blah." And those people are giving them cash to do it. And I went, "Oh, looks like they're trying to give them something." And I just went, how dare they try to help someone else? So, how dare you try to actually give and act like a Christian in this world? So again, not expecting anything in return and not knowing what they're actually going to use the money for, but just saying, "Hey, you need money? I have something. Here you go." All right, so that is the class for today, since apparently the bell didn't go off. So we will pick this up right here next week. Thank you all for your contributions and your discussion today.